Hey, everybody. So, what you're going to hear in a minute is the first episode of a new podcast that Melvin Edwards and I are going to be doing together as often as we can. It's going to be available on the Culture, Faith, and Politics YouTube channel whenever we make a new one. And we're also going to distribute it under its own separate feed wherever you get your podcasts. So, I'm adding this introduction to the first episode just because it's such a new idea for us that we didn't even have a name for the podcast when we recorded this a few days ago. So we're calling it, for now at least, From the North Star to the Lone Star. And you'll see why once you hear us talking. So I've been wanting to do this podcast with Mel because I've been looking for ways to help our listeners to feel a little bit less alone in these changing times. Our goal is to talk with real people from across the country, different regions, who are responding in their own ways to the challenges of the Trump era. And we're hoping to introduce you to a lot of people that maybe you haven't met yet, whether they're writers or social media influencers or people who are working in the trenches to bring beauty to the world in their own way, using their own gifts. So you'll hear more about our first guest in a minute, but for now, I'll just say that I ran across him years ago on Twitter, and he's active on Blue Sky now as well. He goes by Atticus Finch of Georgia, and I recommend that you follow him if you're on those apps. So what you'll hear is three guys who are basically trying to figure out, in this episode, we're hearing from Atticus about what life is like in his part of Georgia. And we're talking about how to engage with friends and family who might disagree with us, some of the challenges of that, and then just a few fun topics along the way too. It does devolve into a vicious debate between Mel and Atticus at the end about who's better, the Monkees or the Beatles. And I don't have a dog in that fight, but I'll just warn you that happens. But what we're trying to do is to just help you to meet people who are in the struggle and trying to be positive, to make a positive change in the world. And so I wanted Atticus to be our first guest because he's been a real influence on me, a real inspiration to me. So anyway, I hope that you enjoy this. Now on to the real introduction, and thanks for listening. Welcome to the Culture, Faith, and Politics podcast. I'm Pat Kahnke, and this is the first official episode that my friend Melvin Edwards and I are co-hosting together. If you haven't met Mel yet, you can listen to the episode from a couple weeks ago where I introduced him to the channel. Mel is a writer and a podcaster, and we talked in that last episode about the two books that he's written about the history of his family. They're called The Eyes of Texans and The Strength of a Thousand Sons. And both are available on Amazon. Now, Mel's podcast is called Stories from Real Life, and it's on YouTube or wherever else you get your podcasts. So Mel and I plan to do this co-hosting thing on a regular basis as a separate podcast from the ones that each of us do. So we're still coming up with a name for what we're going to call this when we do it together like this. But since so far the main source of tension in our relationship comes from the fact that Mel's a Texan and I'm a Minnesotan, we'll probably name it something around that, like maybe Lone Star, North Star. We'll work with that. But anyway, when we talked about who we wanted our first guest to be, I had a very clear choice in mind. Now, Mel's going to introduce him in a minute, so I just want to say that I wanted to get this guest on here right from the start because he's been a huge encouragement to both Mel and myself over the years. When I started on Twitter years ago to talk about the first Trump administration, I ran across this guy and immediately I felt like I found someone who got me. This is my first time actually talking with him in person, but we've emailed over the years. And when I wrote my first book, MAGA Seduction, I sent him a draft of the first chapter. And after reading it, he wrote a couple of lines for me and said that I could use them in the book. And the lines that he wrote summed up my ministry better than I could have said it myself. So I used those lines at the top of my introduction. And like I said, he got me. So this is how he summed up my ministry at that time, and it still is. So if you read that book, you'll see these lines there. I write not to convince Christians to reject Donald Trump and to follow the Democratic Party or Joe Biden or the Never Trump Republicans or any other leader, movement, or party. I write to encourage Christians to reject Donald Trump and to follow Christ. And that's still what I'm about. And thanks for seeing me, Rob. So now I'm just going to let Mel introduce you properly.
All right, so as you can see there on the screen, Rob Ryan is our guest today. And Rob is a Southerner, which is why he talks funny. But he's also an attorney, so he's not a DEI Southerner. He's bona fide. Rob and I are friends in real life, so we tend to pick on each other like big and little brothers. I'm the big brother. Rob is married and has 3 children, but I don't think they'd defend him if he and I got into a fist fight. Hello, Rob Ryan, and welcome to our first episode.
Hey, Mel. Thank you for having me. And Pat, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. Oh, by the way, it's interesting that Pat brought up that chapter from his book because and we did not plan this, by the way. I keep a little stack of writings in my desk drawer that I've been collecting since 2015, 2016 era, just some different things I find of interest or whatever. And I was going through that stack this week, and lo and behold, here's that first chapter, Pat, that you sent me.
Wow.
July 19th, 2020, with some of my handwritten notes on it. So,
wow.
I did not know you were going to talk about that. I didn't plan it, but I've got that here in my stack of somewhat famous writings.
Thank you.
All right, so to make this relevant to what's going on in current events this week, I'm going to pretend for the first question that I'm a U.S. Senator and Rob is a nominee who's in front of the Senate for confirmation hearing. So I've got this quick question. By the way, we're going to say he's nominated for the Attorney General since he's an attorney. All right, your real name is G. Robert Ryan Jr. You use the name Atticus Finch online. Why do you pretend to be a movie character?
Senator, I'd like to just talk about my plans for the Department of Justice and move on from that question. No, it's a good question. It's a serious question. And so when I started on Twitter back around 2016 or 2017 timeframe, I really wanted a place to be able to speak out some about what was going on in the country at the time, politics and faith and things like that. But I wasn't really sure about putting my name out there or how safe that was. I didn't even know much about Twitter or social media at the time. And so I thought what I really need is a pen name, and there's a long history of pen names in the country going all the way back to the Revolutionary War and some of the things that were written at that time. And so I thought, well, who would I like to use as a pen name? And Atticus Finch came to mind immediately because I love To Kill a Mockingbird. I love the book. I love the movie. Like probably countless attorneys around the country, Atticus Finch, the fictional character, was one of my inspirations for wanting to become a lawyer. And so I thought that'll be a good pen name. And then I found out a lot of people use that pen name. So I added, if you look at me now, it says Atticus Finch of Georgia to try to distinguish from the other Atticus Finches out there. There turned out to be quite a few. And so I've just kind of kept it all these years. I've thought about over the years at times doing away with it, just using my real name. But it's not hard to find out who I am. We've made a lot of friends online that know who I am if somebody wants to know me. But I do kind of like having a little bit of an anonymity, a little bit of separation. It helps, I think, to be safer. Now that I'm on Blue Sky, I feel like that's a little bit safer than Twitter because you can block people. But I've still used. A lot of people know me by that. They wouldn't know who I was if I changed it now.
So I have a follow-up question to that. And there's only one right answer to this. So this will determine our relationship, I guess, from here. What did you think about that travesty of publishing Harper Lee's book, Go Set a Watchman, or whatever that was called, after her death, with the very different interpretation of Atticus Finch There's one correct answer.
Well, it's a lot of pressure if our entire relationship is riding on it. I never read it.
Oh, okay.
And my impression of it was it really was probably not even a finished work of hers. It was
Right.
kind of put together. I I'm not a fan of it. I don't plan to read it. You know, there's some things that they're sort of pristine, and you don't want to mess with them. To me, To Kill a Mockingbird is sort of pristine.
Mhm.
I don't want to mess with that, so I don't plan to go read the other book. What do you think about it?
Well, we can be friends because you said the right thing. As a writer myself, sort of, I just know what it's like to actually create a character, and that was an early draft of that character. And she didn't choose to publish that because that was not the character that he ended up being. I just thought it was a really bad idea to put it out there as though the Atticus Finch that inspired somebody like you to use his name as your you know pen name is like that's nothing like the character that it was in that book. That was a process of writing. She chose not to go that direction. And anyway, that's all. So you answered correctly.
I agree. I agree completely.
Yeah, you
Uh,
passed the test.
I'm glad to know we can be friends.
All right, so I've got some serious political questions here based on some experiences that you've had recently. So hopefully this isn't too fresh and the wounds aren't, or at least scabbed over a little bit. Uh, what is life like on talk radio in your area?
I did a little research before I came on today, Pat. Um, we, like a lot of places, we have a local politics talk radio, heavily right wing MAGA sort of thing. It's on every morning for 3 hours, and it's a very popular show in our area. This is a very conservative area. This is a very Trumpy area, and so a person that I've known for a long number of years, hosts the show, and I know a lot of the callers that call in. So I started listening this week to kind of get a feel for. I've listened to it in the past, and then I wouldn't because it just makes me angry. So I listened this week to see what they were talking about, and it's gotten worse. It seems to have gotten worse. I actually had a little back and forth with the host this week because I texted him after listening to the show some. Wasn't let him know that I was listening to a show and just asked him some questions. But there were some things that I heard said that were the callers to me, and these are people in our community who call in, and it can be any kind of political issue they talk about. There seemed to be an anger there that probably has been building for a long time, but to me it seemed even worse than what I remembered when I'd listened to the show before. One guy on the day I listened, the issue, there's been so many issues, y'all. It's a fire hose of issues. I'm trying to remember what the issue was that day. It was about the illegal immigrants being taken by a military plane to Colombia and the whole little kerfuffle with the Colombian president, which is now like issue 45 times ago, but that was the issue of the day. And somebody had called in who kind of took a contrary position and said, hey, I think it cost a lot of money to use these military transports. I don't know if that's a wise use of our money. I'm not sure that's what we should be doing. And the host is pleasant to people that call in that aren't necessarily Trump fans. So then somebody else called in, and he wanted to know, almost demanding, who was that person that called in and questioned using taxpayer money to fly these people down there? I want to know that person's name. And then he said something about getting I think he said the damn liberals out of here. And there was just an anger over that. And then, along the same vein, there was discussion about how great it was that in the past, if there was an issue with a foreign country like Colombia, maybe there would be a meeting, maybe there'd be some cabinet members that would meet or some group, and they might formulate some recommendations and give those to the president. And then the president might consider that, might make a statement or enact, or something would take place. There'd be a process. But they were saying how great it was that now there does not have to be any kind of process. That when something happens, Trump can just simply, literally, this is what was being said. Trump can be on the golf course, hit a tee shot, tweet out to the Colombian president what we're going to do, and then hit his next shot. And we've eliminated all the bureaucracy and all the time consuming to make a decision, and he can do it all. And I'm sitting there thinking, this is in no way how you conduct foreign policy. People thought it was a great thing. So I have heard in recent times on this same show some anti-Jewish type sentiments expressed. Just a lot of stuff that's really ugly, and it depresses me. I try not to listen to it too often.
All right, so enough of the fun and games with talk radio. Apparently, the next thing you went on to was attending a funeral. So tell me the weird thing that happened while you were at the funeral.
This is so bizarre, but it is what happened. A longtime friend passed away, sadly too young, and we went to the funeral, and there were a lot of people there. It's a big funeral, and there were a couple of pastors who were going to speak. Well, the very first pastor who got up to speak, I don't think he knew the family as well anyway as the other pastor who spoke later. So he was sort of the introductory pastor at the funeral. But the first thing he gets up and does is says, I welcome everybody here to the funeral for Melinda Trump. Well, her name is not Melinda Trump. That's not her last name. That is her first name, but not her last name. Obviously a slip of the tongue. Obviously he did not mean to say Trump. There was a lot of nervous laughter, but it just sort of, to me, in a way, kind of crystallized, what's going on down here? Or do we have to deal with Trump everywhere, even at a funeral? It comes up, and is this really what's on people's minds? I mean, I'm not trying to throw him under the bus. I don't know why he came out with that. And he was obviously embarrassed it was a slip up, but is that what he had been thinking about before he went up on stage? I don't know. But it just seems like it's hard to get away from Trump. And y'all know, the entire country knows it's very hard to get away from Trump right now. I think we sort of had a false sense of, between the election in November and the inauguration in January, maybe there was sort of a false sense or some hope that this won't be so bad. But then as soon as he is inaugurated and he has real power, which was always my concern, once you have real power again, what's he going to do with it? And it's just been a daily barrage, it feels like to me. And what's really depressing is being in an area where so many people that you've known your whole life, that you've respected your whole life, that you've looked up to your whole life, think that it's just fine. Are totally 100% in support of it, to the extent that if you're not, people look at you like there's something wrong with you, and so it can be a bit depressing at times because it's hard to see a way out of it. Like, what is it that will cause people to, you almost feel like you want to grab people sometimes and shake them and say, hey, this is not who you are. Like I've known you all my life. You taught me my values. This is not who you are. Why are you following after this? But of course we can't shake them out of it or debate them into it. It's something they've got to come to on their own.
So
somehow.
So do you mind if I jump in for a second?
Sure.
What is it about you that caused you to come to different conclusions than basically most of the people around you, it sounds like? Because you were always, my understanding, a pretty conservative guy and stuff like that. And what do you think is different? What did it for you?
It's a question I've asked myself a million times, Pat. I look back and the way that we grew up around here. I wouldn't even call it conservative. I call it very traditional sort of background. Um, we were Baptist. We were Southern Baptist. We were there's sort of people that may wander into a Baptist church, and there's people that are sure enough Baptist, and that was us. Born and raised and steeped in it. A very traditional Southern culture, a very traditional church culture, and for most of my life, that seemed great. I mean, I didn't always agree with everything that went on, but for the most part, it seemed great. I did not have the bad experiences that you hear about these days. You hear a lot about, abuse and different things that may go on. I never experienced anything like that in any of the churches where we were raised, grew up, around the people we were with. It's nothing but good memories. Some of my earliest memories are of being in a little country church. It was our family home church. My grandmother playing the piano, and being there in that church. And then I think about other churches over the years that meant a lot to us, where I was baptized. Later on, I met with my wife in church, and we were married, and that church we attended at the time meant a lot to us, a Southern Baptist church. A lot of great people, a lot of great friends, a lot of great memories. My father-in-law was what we call a bivocational pastor. And so what that really means is that he was a farmer and did other jobs during the week and went and pastored a small church on Sunday. And that's what he did for virtually his entire life, and a Southern Baptist pastor. And so I was always in that world, and it's kind of been turned upside down this past decade, to the extent that we don't attend a Baptist church anymore, which is something like, if you'd asked me 10 years ago about that, not attending a Baptist church, that would have been like Melvin not wearing a cowboy hat. You just think, well, of course, where else would we go to church? This is who we are. But we find ourselves at a place where we're no longer attending the Baptist church, and I don't know that we ever will again. I'm not going to say completely that we won't, but I think it's unlikely. And so there's a lot that's happened, and it certainly didn't happen overnight. It happened over nearly a decade now.
Well, I've got one more question to ask before I turn it over to Pat, and this one's pretty sobering. And if you're uncomfortable answering it, please say so. And you're the kind of person that I think we need to be recruiting to run for Congress, run for office or something. You're a family man. You've got a business. You've got credentials. Like I said in the beginning, you're bona fide, to borrow the line from "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" But here's the question for you that might be a little bit too close to home. If you ran for Congress, do you think your own extended family members would vote for you now?
I don't know. I don't know. If I ran with an R behind my name, they might. If I ran with a D behind my name, or an I behind my name, well, if I ran with a D behind my name, they wouldn't vote for me. They would think I'd lost my mind. So I don't know, Mel. To me, this era has created divisions in families, and it's disturbing. People seem to sometimes put more stock in what Trump says than in what their own loved ones that they know would say. Like, for example, a family member asked me, and I'm not going to say who it is, but a family member asked me recently on the day of the inauguration. We were not talking. I do not discuss politics with my extended family, by the way. I used to. I don't anymore. We try to stay away from it. We were talking about the weather, the snowstorm that was coming, and literally. And the question was asked, well, are you going to be watching the inauguration today? And I very respectfully, I said, well, I don't know. I doubt I'll watch that. I'll probably got some other things I need to do. And the next thing was, well, are you still one of those crazy anti-Trump liberals? And this was from a very close family member. And you think, I don't even know what that means really, to be a crazy anti-Trump liberal. But whatever you think it means, that's probably not what I am. And I'm the same person that you've known all your life, you know. And so you wonder, and getting back to Pat's question, which I didn't answer, I don't know the answer to that question, Pat, about why me and my wife reacted differently to Trump. We paid a price for it. I can tell you that. We paid a personal price for it. I would not have it any other way. When I started listening to him, and we would have people say to us weird things like, well, y'all are just being influenced by the mainstream media. And the fact is, we don't even watch the news. We don't have cable news on at our house. We don't even watch that stuff. So I really didn't know what they were talking about. But to us, way back in the beginning, 15 and 16, it was simply a matter of listening to Trump and hearing the things I really had no opinion of him when he started running. I thought he was a carnival act. He was kind of famous. I knew, he was kind of a playboy, whatever, did The Apprentice. Beyond that, I really had no opinion of him much. It was when I started listening to the things he was saying, the birtherism, the anti-immigration stuff, just the unthinking way he would speak and the cruel way he would speak. And I just knew immediately, there's no way I could ever support this guy, no matter what. There was never, I never had a debate. There was never like some moment of, gosh, what do I do? I knew I could never support this guy. And
Right.
it's been that way ever since.
Yeah, I can relate to that. And um, the one thing I would add that I'm sure you can relate to also is I just assumed that my family, for instance, and friends would all see it the same way as me. I didn't realize I was being controversial until it started to become apparent that they didn't agree with me. And it's like, wait, what? I Because we were all raised with the same values, and it's like I continue to be stunned. It's like pushing on a bruise every time I talk with them, with my family, because it's uh, that's the people that I would lean on for support in years past, and that we would just agree on everything. It's I had a friend call me a couple days ago to talk about this stuff because so I'm in St. Paul, so I'm surrounded by people who agree with me on this kind of stuff in St. Paul, but I have the luxury of only kind of talking to the people that don't bug me right now. But I had a friend call me a couple days ago who lives down in southern Minnesota, and everyone that he knows is a Trump supporter, and they needle him about it. And he talked about, so I've known him for 30 years or more, and he talked about a family member that he uh, you know shared some of my videos, and she knows me well. She's known me for over 30 years, and she's like, Pat's a lunatic, and it's like, so Trump has become, I've said this before, that Jesus is the one who says he'll bring a sword to divide father from son, mother from daughter. He's the sword. But for many people, Trump has become the sword. Your relationship to Trump determines what sort of what people you belong to. And if you speak out, you're a lunatic all of a sudden. And I'm thinking, I don't feel like a lunatic, but anyway.
So you said something very interesting, Pat, and I wonder what you think because you mentioned something that hit home with me, which is we were all raised with the same values, and you were surprised when people. I remember very clearly back in the early day, probably the Republican primary in 2015, whenever that was going on, having a conversation with a longtime friend, and he was a pastor, is a pastor, and he told me he was thinking about voting for Trump, and I literally laughed out loud because I thought he was joking, and he got offended, and he was not joking, and that was one of the moments when I started to realize, oh, wait a minute. So that's what's really bugged me all this time is what you said. We were all raised with a lot of the same values. When people say, Pat, you're a lunatic, or Rob, you're a crazy liberal, I want to say I'm only trying to live up to the values that y'all taught me. And so it's hard for me to understand even now after 10 years of trying to figure it out.
Now, the hardest part for me is you mentioned cruelty, Trump's cruelty. And the hardest part for me is the imitation of the cruelty by so many of his followers. People who are so vile and vulgar in the way they interact with total strangers. That's the part that's the hardest for me to comprehend.
Yeah, it's got something to do with social media, I believe, and the way people generally interact on social media. And then Trump makes it many, many times worse because they just feel like they can say or do anything, and it doesn't matter. And if you're not with Trump, you're the enemy. It's not just that you have a different point of view; it's that you're the enemy. You know, you hate America, or you hate our way of life, whatever that means, or you hate, you know, why have you turned against us? And you're now seen as being the enemy.
So, Rob, you said something interesting when you were starting. You talked about listening to talk radio, and you talked about some of the anger that people were expressing. And I just want to hear you talk about. I have an idea about how to talk about this. You know, I've been using, I think, too much. I've been using in private conversations. I'll talk about how people are filled with hatred. Um, and I don't think that's the right word. I think anger is better. You know, it's like I think too often we accuse some of the people. You know, we see some of the extreme cases of people who are all in for Trump on TV, and it's easy. I hear a lot of people call them stupid or call them hateful. I think angry is a better word, and it's like it just helps me to think about what are they angry about, because I think that he's playing on their anger. What do you think people are angry about that you're interacting with?
Well, I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. Um, well, I believe as if we try to follow Jesus, we have to show mercy to others. We're going to be in need of it one day. And so I can, most of the people that I know that are Trump supporters in this area are not your Proud Boy types. They're not your militia types. They're not into anything at all like that. They're in every other aspect of their life. They're normal, good citizens. You know, they would give you the shirt. They would literally give you the shirt off their back. I have no doubt to anybody. But when it comes to to politics and to Trump, they've got this. I think you're right. It's this anger and outrage. I attribute a lot of it to Fox News and the propaganda that's out there. I mean, I used to think that was a bit overblown, that maybe it didn't really have that much to do with that. But I've kind of changed my tune because I've noticed that when I go into a lot of the people's houses, even family members, whatever, that's what's on as the background noise is Fox News, or even in businesses around town. It's the constant background to everything. And what do? Well, they keep people outraged. Like that's how they attract viewers. That's how I believe that's their business plan. I believe in some capacity is to keep people outraged. If there was ever a day where they said there's nothing to be outraged about today, nobody would watch it. And so they keep people stirred up. They keep people outraged. They present a very, obviously, extremely one-sided view. And, and that's what a lot of these folks hear. Like, they don't hear other sources of news. They will not. I ride around in my F-150 in South Georgia and listen to NPR all the time. There aren't too many people doing that. And they're not getting other sources of news or more reasonable sources of information. So you've got people feeding into this and keeping them outraged. And then Trump is like throwing gasoline on the fire. And so for a lot of these folks, if you talk about any issue you want to talk about, you could talk about transgender. Like my wife and I were talking about this. I don't really understand that. I have nothing against anybody in this world. If that's what you are, God bless you. Have a good life. I'm not against you. I'm for you. But I don't understand the issue. I don't really know anybody well that's transgender. It's kind of a mystery to me. But for a lot of folks, they've become convinced that, man, these people are trying to turn my kids into transgender kids. And they think that. And it's like, I mean, my wife and I talk about it, we're like, nobody's trying to turn our kids into transgender kids. Why do people think this? It's because they're hearing this kind of stuff constantly. And so they believe that kind of thing. They believe DEI means that if there's I don't want to use airplane because of the tragedy, some other kind of mode. If your ship is being piloted by a black captain, well, that captain must not be qualified, because this is being drummed into them constantly over and over and over again. And so how do you break people out of that? And frankly, I think there's an entertainment aspect to it. People, Joe Biden, God bless him, he was boring. I like that. I could go 3 or 4 weeks at a time and never think about Joe Biden. That's kind of what I want in a president, to be honest. But a lot of people, they crave that, adrenaline rush. And so it's just a poisonous thing. And yes, they're angry, they're outraged. If they woke up tomorrow with nothing to be outraged about, I don't think they would know what to do with themselves.
Yeah. I think, I asked you that question about what makes you different. Like, why did you go a different direction than a lot of the people around you? I know the answer for myself is that when I went into ministry, however many years ago this was now, almost 30 years ago. When I started ministry, I was in an echo chamber. I was the early internet, chat rooms and stuff like that. The Fox News, but mostly talk radio and some early internet stuff. And when I went into pastoral ministry, I got out of all of that, not because I thought that it was poisoning my mind, but because I just didn't want to be divisive. I didn't want, because I was noticing that I was judging the way that I was judging people in my congregation for their political views, and I thought, this just isn't right. They're wrong, whatever, is what I thought, but I shouldn't be judging them. And so I thought it was getting in the way of ministry. So I completely got out of all of that. And so then when I retired from pastoral ministry in 2016, I started to watch the news again. And I think that I had been detoxified. And I think that for people who haven't stepped out of that, it's really hard to understand even what I'm talking about if you've been consuming that for decades. But I had 20 years of not consuming that. And when I stepped back in, it was like there's no possible way I was going to go in that direction. It was repulsive to me in a way that it wasn't, decades earlier.
So how do you get people to step away from that? So when you went back to it, it probably felt dark to you.
Oh,
oppressive.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know how to get people. I talked with someone I love very much a couple weeks ago and told her, um, I can't even talk about this stuff as long as she's still watching Fox News, because anything that I say is meaningless. It's like, because she'll hear something the next day or later that day that undoes any progress that we might have made. And so for me, I'm kind of refusing to talk with anyone about politics who I know is ingesting that stuff, because it's like, it's a it's a drug. It's messing with their minds the way that you try to talk to somebody who's drunk, and it's like, I know it sounds offensive, but it's how I actually feel about it, because I was in that for a long time, and I know how I thought back then, and I know how I think now. And it's not that I've been poisoned by the mainstream media. That's just a cop out that people say. It's dumb. It's dumb to say that to somebody like me. It's no, I'm not ingesting the poison every day. That's the difference.
Yeah, it's and it's I don't know how you break that. I don't think we can. I think somehow they have to do it themselves. They have to come to the realization themselves. You cannot debate or discuss these people out of that. They have to figure it out themselves. Maybe it's when they're personally affected by something that Trump does, or somebody close to them is personally affected. I don't know.
So one thing I'll say that you do well, um, on Twitter and now on Blue Sky, is that you say a lot of really just common sense things, in your posts on Twitter, but you also say a lot of things that are they cut in the right way. You're saying what you believe, and you're doing it very directly a lot of times. But the thing that you do really well is you also talk about life. You talk about other things that you care about. It's not all politics. And so I feel like I know you, even though it's the first time that we're talking face to face like this. I feel like I know you on some level, because you do share more than just the political thing. And I feel like that's there. We're all human beings, and if we can find ways to still share our lives with people that we disagree with, I think you do that well. And I think that's one reason so many people follow you on Twitter, is that um, they see you as a full human being, even if they don't know your actual name. And there's humorous stuff, the 3-year Letterman or whatever, post on there, and it's like, uh, I just think that's one thing that I've learned from you, is to be as well rounded as possible in the way that I interact with people.
Well, there may be something that's there about how to break people out of this, because if you get to know somebody, that they're less likely to go off on you or just say something terrible if they know you. I mean, if Melvin posted something I disagreed with on Blue Sky, I'm not going to call Melvin a stupid moron, because Melvin and I are friends. And so, the more you can try to build connections with people, even people, there's a lot of people out there who may have voted for Trump the first time, may have voted for Trump the second time, and may not have voted for him the third time, and may have seen the light on that. I don't like giving up on people. I guess the even though I'm not even really sure we're Baptist anymore, probably my most Baptist belief is that anybody can be redeemed. And I don't believe it's too late, even for Trump himself. Now, it would take an absolute miracle of God. We could, we don't even have to go to church anymore. We've seen all the proof we need of God here. But even for Trump himself, I don't believe it's too late for anybody to be redeemed and to start down a better path. And hopefully there are people that will come to see that. It seems hard to see it now. And Melvin and I were talking off recording about the DEI thing. And I'm sitting there thinking, you know, if I'm a black man and I'm hearing this stuff, how hurtful is this? Um, but we've all been hurt in different ways over these years. So how do we still try to have relationships with people through this? It is hard, but I think it's something we have to try to do.
Yeah, I do think that, anyone who's done work with like cults will tell you that the only way people come out of cults ultimately is through relationship. So it's like, relationships with people who love them and walk along with them. And again, I know that sounds derogatory to people who maybe are voting for Trump right now or supporting him, that I would refer to it that way. But there's a certain cultish level to people who are deep into the MAGA movement. I'm not talking about just every Trump voter. And I think that relationship is the way out. And for myself, I just have to be clear. Like I said, I'm not going to talk politics with people like that, but I'll still love them. I'll still get together and talk about anything else, share life, And on my channel on YouTube, sometimes people criticize me, like, how can you say that you have friends or that you love these people who vote this way or whatever? And it's like, I do look at it like, yeah, we have this big disagreement, but I know who they are at core, and I'm not willing to write people off just because I have even a strong disagreement like this.
Yeah, I mean, and the only time I would write somebody off, I still wouldn't write them off, but I would just not interact with them, as if somebody was just really being, um, just coming after me, or just saying nasty stuff, or whatever. But
Right.
as long as we can be civil to each other, I'm going to try to do that, and try to hope that but it's hard. It's hard. I
Mhm.
mean, when something like these the January 6th pardons happen, boy, do I want to call up some people in my own family and say, so what do you think about this? Do you really support this? Can you really justify this? Um, but I don't, for the same reason you don't, Pat. It's not going to be productive.
Right.
I'm not going to change their minds.
Right. So I want to turn a corner real quick here, and just since I've got somebody with a law background on here, uh, um, I want to ask, like, if there are things that you specifically. One of the things I'm encouraging people to do who listen to my channel is to say, we can't take on everything. Each of us can't take on everything, but maybe we have an area of expertise that we might choose right now. We're going to engage on this. I'm going to engage on this, or I have an issue of passion, something I'm passionate about. How do you see your role, like in the next few years? How do you see, what would be, one or two things that you could see yourself just really pouring yourself into, either through your law expertise or something else? Like, how do you see yourself being helpful in the next few years?
Well, one thing we started, and we had to get together in December, and I hope we have another one real soon. Is we sort of realized that we had a little group of friends, uh, acquaintances really, who were like minded. Who we knew them, but we did not really know them that well. We had never been to each other's houses. Another attorney, actually a couple, a husband and wife, both attorneys that we know. A school teacher that we know, and her husband, who happens to be a big old redneck looking truck driver who is as anti-Trump as anybody you'll ever find. And there's 5 or 6 couples, and we kind of put this group together, and we met up in December and had supper at somebody's house, at one of the houses, and just sat around. We talked about politics a little bit. We talked about a lot of other stuff, and we're just kind of trying to find some community there with some like-minded people who might feel kind of isolated, to be able to get together every now and then and kind of share life together. So that's one thing we're doing that I'm kind of excited about. Beyond that, I don't really know. I've been kind of casting about and thinking about different things. I've been wondering what lawyer groups might be able to do during this time to kind of stand up for the rule of law through some of the bar associations or different things like that. And I don't, I don't, I don't know that our state associations would go that route because they don't want to be political, but there might be ways to create new groups of lawyers. And there are some groups out there already. Like there's the Society for the Rule of Law that Judge Ludig, who posts a lot online, is involved in. And so there's some groups out there like that. And maybe we can look at starting a local chapter or doing something of that nature. I do think there's a role for attorneys to somehow come together, like-minded attorneys at least. And you run into a lot of people in the lawyer community, at least I do, who are like-minded. I think a lot of us see, regardless of our politics, we see the danger of disregarding the rule of law and of some of the stuff that's going on. So I think there may be some opportunities there in the years to come to just speak out, not individually, but more as a group of lawyers on issues. Um, you know, I wish I sit there and I fantasize sometimes about getting involved in some of the big cases out there, But the fact is, my law practice is so busy that I wouldn't really have the time. So I think we all have to do what we can in our areas. Some of us are able to do more than others. Everybody can do something. You may feel like you have a small circle of influence, but you can still do something. So I'm definitely kind of looking around for that opportunity.
Yeah. One of my strong beliefs about this is that, what we're dealing with here, it's an authoritarian movement, whatever you want to call it, and authoritarians, they want to keep you scared, but they want to keep you feeling alone too. And I think I love the idea that you said of like that you're bringing some people into your home, like that are like-minded, like those of us who've been parts of churches all the time, have grown up doing that sort of thing. But outside of the church, my wife and I just started. We just started a Spanish club. I should say my wife did, because she knows Spanish. She's pretty good at it. She's done her since high school, and I'm learning it. And we've been going to different Spanish speaking countries, and we're learning salsa dance now. And so we had people over to the house the other day that we didn't know, but we had the connection of we're all trying to learn Spanish together, building community. And for me, the Spanish thing is important because with the immigration stuff that's happening and everything, I encounter a lot of Spanish speaking people when I'm out doing my work, and it's like I want to just be, a friendly face, and somebody who can say hello in their language. So for me, it's a small thing, but it's like a self-care thing that we're doing that has nothing to do with politics, but yet it's trying to rebuild some of the fabric of society that's being pulled apart by all this toxic political stuff. So that's something we're doing.
Yeah, that's excellent. And something else that comes to mind that we've talked about is our youngest daughter at home, she's 12. She's a very influential age where she can be easily influenced. Goes to school with a lot of kids whose parents are MAGA, Trump types. We're just concerned about her. She is a very loving child. She loves everybody. She's, we want her to stay that way. And so we're just kind of kicking around, just maybe trying to do more travel, just trying to take her to some different places and see some different things. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of things I love about where we live, but I don't want her to grow up and be where she thinks that's the only world that exists. And so we just talked about trying to get out and show her some different things, to see there's more out there. Not everybody thinks alike. Not everybody lives alike. Not everybody acts alike. That's okay. We want her to be, in the best sense of the word, liberal minded. You know what I mean? Small. I'm not talking about liberal politics. I'm talking about a liberal minded citizen, an open minded citizen. And so, we're going to try to do some of that as sort of self protection because we're really concerned about her and some of the attitudes of some of the young men around here and different things that we just want to protect her from the best we can.
I would strongly recommend shielding her from social media.
Yeah.
That's number one defense.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
So Mel, I'll just turn it over to you here. If you have any final things, that you want to ask Rob, or if you want to wrap it up, then.
Well, the last question I want to ask is unrelated to politics. Is do you really think the Monkees are better than the Beatles? That's the only question that's relevant in society today.
I knew that was going to be the question.
That's an age-old question, and I think it's like 50-50, right? Half the
And
people in the world are for the Monkees and half are for the Beatles. It's got to be like a very narrow gap, right?
All I can say is that
why are you two trying to create a whole new level of division in this country?
Well, you brought it up. I'm
all,
attracted to conflict. What can I say?
all I can say is I believe the Monkees actually sold more records than the Beatles in the 60s.
In 1 year. In one
It-
year they did.
in 1 year.
The year they were on vacation, they were in India.
I guess it just goes to show you people believe anything, So
We've had a lot of fun about that over the years.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, it has been fun, and so many people think it's a serious conversation, serious argument between us.
Right.
It's at least for me, it's not.
I'll give away one of my secrets, but if Melvin repeats this on line, I'm going to deny it all day long. I probably only know like 2 Monkey songs: "Last Train to Clarksville" and what's the other
Daydream
one?
Believer.
"Daydream Believer." And I've pretty much built my entire opinion on 2 songs. So Melvin may have a point about the Beatles.
Truth
But
be
those
known,
two
the Monkees
songs-
only have 2 songs.
But
That's
those
it.
2 songs are better than anything the Beatles ever wrote. And with that, we'll end the conversation.
Let's let it go.
Yeah. So thank you, Rob, so much for talking with us here. And I just want to thank you again just for I consider it a ministry, what you're doing on social media. I think you're good at it. I think you're good at Twitter and Blue Sky. I think for myself, I was casting around looking for anyone who could tell me I wasn't crazy years ago when I was opposing Trump, and it actually really helped to find. At first, I found you, and I saw your stuff, and then eventually I found Melvin and others, and it's like it's so isolating to feel like, well, I'm the only one who's seeing this. I never actually thought I was crazy, but it was really upsetting to not have people that I could just like, okay, they're seeing the same thing, and so I think you serve that purpose on the social media stuff that you're doing. I think it's actually really important. So I just want to thank you for that.
Well, I appreciate y'all's friendship. We've made I have real friends online over the years. Got to meet some in person, and it's been a good thing. There's a lot of bad about social media. There's a lot of good also.
Right. So, all right. And Mel, thanks for doing this. And we had some recording issues during this, so we'll see how I'm able to piece this all together. But I think you gave us a lot of wisdom, Rob, and I just appreciate you taking the time. And I hope we do this again. So,
Anytime. Thank you.